And we're here with Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Nothing much, man. What's going on with you?
Having a beautiful Labor Day. Full Labor Day. We were talking about this just before we came on. It's not like your typical Labor Day. College classes are still in the schedule. Your high school classes today, they still happening?
Yeah, it's online only. It's a pain in the ass. Algebra. I'm not.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I go into journalism further on, in my life. So hopefully, this is a thing of the past with algebra. But we'll get through it.
Yeah, I hope if you ever need help with algebra, you let me know. I got you on some of the X, Y, and Z type stuff. It's funny, I haven't done math in so long. So
Why,
long.
why do you think we majored in journalism, man? Like, thank God.
That's part of it. That's the thing. Like it's funny. I wish I could go back and tell my middle school and high school self when I was, just struggling through math classes and staying up until 1 a.m. studying for, an algebra or geometry test. Like, hey, buddy, it's gonna be okay. You're never gonna do this anyways. Just
Yeah.
get the gentleman's B and move on from
hmm
it. But obviously, that's sort of the fun of being a kid. You don't know what you're gonna go into, but look at us. So Bruins, a lot of stuff. Exit interviews were last week. I think Sweeney is going to go at some point this week. I would assume Neely as well. Uh, there was a lot to take away. First of all, it was fun because all the interviews were like on one day. So,
Yeah.
or
It's
there
like
were
a
2 days,
marathon.
just a marathon, one after the other, after the other, after the other, from DeBrusk to Krejci to Pastrnak. David Krejci bringing up that on Friday that he was angry at reporters for not asking him questions after the game. That's part of why he gave such a depressing answer about the organization. It was obviously because he was mad about asking not asking him questions. How did we not know?
I know. I mean, we really dropped the ball there. I can't tell if that's just like I think that's the classic, very dry sense of humor from David Krejci, which is like also hard to land over a Zoom call, especially.
And it's
Like,
him. It's
yeah,
not like it's like
exactly. Yeah,
DeBrusk or someone.
yeah,
It's David
exactly.
Krejci.
Yeah.
The funny thing was there was a moment this year at a practice. I think it was like in January, might have been. We walked into the locker room back in the day. Remember those times?
That's a
We
long
walked
time
in.
ago.
Yeah, we walked in and there was Chara and Marshawn, and
hmm
everyone went to Marshawn, and me and like three other reporters went to Chara.
hmm
Chara immediately got really angry about like the whole thing.
hmm
He goes from each of us. He lets us each ask a question because he goes, okay, you four, you can ask all the questions. So we just ask questions. A reporter comes up who was not in the initial scrum.
hmm
Chara looks at him and just says nope and just walks away. Like just
Yeah.
goodbye. So it is a thing. I think players do get like very self-conscious when there's
hmm
two guys available and no one's talking to them, especially if they're a
Yeah.
veteran. Like if you're
hmm
Carson Kuhlman and you're going at the same time as Brad Marchand,
Right.
you're lucky to get asked a question, but Chara and Marchand, Chara's a bit of a veteran. So there were lots of exit interviews. What stood out to me was the Torey Krug stuff. Obviously, it's been a few days to process this. I've always been a big re-sign Torey Krug guy. I've always been in that camp throughout the season. I was totally for it, especially before COVID when the cap was going to probably go up. Hey, the Bruins have the cap space. Re-sign the guy. He's a leader. He's dynamic on the offensive side of things, all that fun stuff. But I've been kind of getting a change of feeling lately. And this isn't even just from the comments made this past week. But, Bruins Stats tweeted out some stuff about how Krug really isn't potent 5-on-5. Most of his faceoffs from the offensive zone. He's somewhat sheltered. The Bruins don't have a lot of space. You also saw in the postseason, they didn't, Krug was good, not great, especially 5-on-5. I think he was on the ice for the most 5-on-5 goals allowed.
Yeah.
You also look at their depth. You look at, defensively, they weren't super great. Maybe it is time to move on from Torey Krug. Maybe it's not the right – at this moment, I don't think it's a stupid thing to move on and invest that money in other places, not just one place.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm think I'm kind of in the same boat now. If we're looking back at February when you think everything was normal, and the fact that the cap was supposed to jump up anywhere from I think like 84 to 88.2 million. So I mean, even if that's in between, the Bruins are looking pretty good, especially the fact that they cut all that extra cap with David Backes, moving most of his money off the books. You saved about a million with the Heinen Ritchie trade, which that would have been at least one caveat out of the way that trade kind of mapped out. And then even like I think they're getting Bolesky's deferred money off the books. They were getting like the final hit of Seidenberg's buyout off the books. Like they were looking pretty good. Like they could have legitimately added like another piece or two just through free agency without really having to take a long look at a guy like Krug, who's kind of the biggest shoot or drop this offseason. But now you look at it, they're dealing with that. You look at the way this window of this team is like. All right, if Krug walks, yeah, there's some things you have to address, right? Like obviously in the locker room, he's a key piece on that team, as kind of that bridge in between, that veteran core and like this, growing pool of younger players like McAvoy and Grizzly, DeBrusk, all those guys. Like he's very key in that room as being kind of that, the first guy you go and talk to. I think he mentioned once that, it's sometimes these rookies or younger guys come in like, all right, do I go up to Zdeno Chara after no media asks him a question, and ask him something? Or do I talk to like Torey Krug, who's 28, 29, a little bit easier to connect to, kind of a guy like that who still has been in the league for a long time. So, losing him in that regard, is a hit. Still, but I mean, you still got that franchise, kind of those cornerstones in that dressing room. You still got, guys like Coyle and Corrali and Wagner is kind of that new kind of bridge, in between those kind of groups. But I think you look at the other areas of, where you can improve and where you can kind of keep moving on without Krug. Like I think the power play, you're still going to have a pretty solid, good, probably great power play, right? Where you still got those pieces up front. You put in Matt Grzelcyk in that role, who may not be as dynamic, but even if he kind of keeps it simple there and he's just, on the blue line, recovering pucks, getting to loose pucks, sending them back, down to Marchand or Bergeron or something like that. He's a guy who also has improved in his shot quite a bit. So, he's not like he's not going to be a threat from, the high slot, firing shots. I think, you can still kind of still draw without him. I think the biggest challenge is just finding a top four guy that can at least log, 20 minutes, and at least give you something. Like, as you said, I think, 5-on-5 play, which is where they really have to improve. Krug really wasn't as dynamic as, clearly not as much on the power play, but you just need a guy like Krug who can, play 20 minutes capably, because I don't think you can go into next year expecting, we'll just put in John Moore or something like that. We'll put in, maybe Urho Vakanainen's ready, which doesn't seem like he is. So.
Urho get in the lineup. I mean,
yeah,
you're right. And it's funny you mentioned the power play with Grzelcyk compared to Krug. Now, granted, 5-on-5. Bruins Stats tweeted this. Power play Grzelcyk and Pasta only, again, 72 minutes time on ice. Goals for over 60 of 12.3. Krug and Pastrnak without Grzelcyk, obviously a lot more time. Goals for 60 of 10.3. So to me, you add all those in. You also add in the fact that Krug's contract is not going to be like 4 years again. They're not going to get away with giving this guy another 4-year deal. This guy wants to cash in, and he's right. He should cash in. I think Krug absolutely 100% deserves a long-term deal. I just don't think it's in the Bruins' best interest to do that or to be that team. I think that's for a team like the Red Wings. I think that's going to be the team that ultimately scoops him up. But you're going to have that deal for 8, let's say 7 or 8 years. Get that deal for that amount of time. As we're seeing now, and a big topic obviously is this veteran core. Your Krejcis, your Bergerons, your Marchands, your Charas, your Rasks don't have a lot of time left. We thought Chara was done. Now I guess he isn't. Yeah. But you have a limited window. I would say about maybe 2, potentially 3 years with Bergeron, Krejci at least as your centerman. After that, what is your future? We'll get later in the show. We'll get to the younger guys sort of hitting their, when they're going to kind of start to come through. But If you're rebuilding or retooling in 4 to 5 years, and you still have an 8-year, $8 million deal from Torey Krug on your contract, on your books, who's 34, 35 years old, I mean, you're not going to want that. Like that, we're going to look back and go, especially if they don't win a cup. Like if let's say they re-signed him to an 8-year, $8 million deal, and they don't win the cup with him, then it's like, well, this was a bust. What was the point of this?
Right.
So, and it already isn't looking like they're going to be winning the cup next year or the year after. They'll contend, but it's hard to sit here and say, they'll definitely do it unless they take Krug's money and retool. So again, you could, I was looking at, granted, I'm not an expert on these free agent defensemen, but someone like TJ Brody out in Calgary or Sammy Vatanen is a good option as well. Brenton Dillon. You could also take some money, $2-3 million, put it in the bottom six. Find a good, solid third line left winger for Charlie Coyle. Or maybe this is kind of a crazy idea. Find someone who fits better with David Krejci.
Oh, really?
Wouldn't that be crazy?
That's a bold strategy, Evan.
They're the most bold. But so, and Kasha might fit there. I mean, who knows? Watch Kasha come back next year and score like 40 goals. And we'll be like, oh my God, look at what the Bruins were missing last year.
Yeah.
But I do think that it is, and I think you're seeing a shift among Bruins fans and among Bruins media, because I think we all were on the re-sign Torey Krug train. And then, I mean, again, I think I said this to you before, the poor guy, always 1-year deal, 4-year deal. Yeah. His payday comes around and the league decides to do a flat cap. So I think he'll still get it. I think he'll be with the Red Wings, but would have been nice to see him stay in Boston. Definitely one of the better players to cover.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely one of the more fun, talks, and just Torey Krug's a good guy.
Yeah. No, I mean, like he's, whatever he gets in free agency, whether it be here or anywhere else, would be kind of well-deserved for, again, as you said, a guy who, comes in with a chip on his shoulder as an undrafted free agent, excels, in his role, gets through Providence because the Bruins are so cash-strapped, they can only offer him a 1-year deal and sign him to another 1-year deal. And then, like, it's finally his payday, and it's kind of like this bridge 4-year, $5.25 million, when I'm sure, like, ideally he'd want to be re-upped long-term. So I think that's going to be the biggest issue with the Bruins. Not really the cap hit per year. Like, they can still retool some things if they wanted to get him under the cap, especially if he takes, a discount of, 7.5 or something like that. But I think it's more or less the term, right? Because the Bruins probably would be like, we'll give you, 7.5, but, it's a 4-year deal or something like that. And, a guy like him who's been, going with those kind of, bad term contracts for years now, like it's time for him to, deservedly get that, 7-8 year deal. Like he's earned it. Like that dude's been one of the best, offensive defensemen in the league for years now.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And he's also, he's a family man. He's got a young daughter, a wife, just a good guy. Mm-hmm. And it's time for him to get paid. I mean, I'm totally with him on that. I just don't think it'll be the Bruins that do it. And I don't think they should either, as we've said for the past few minutes. So another exit interview takeaway. We'll kind of hit on this quickly because I think obviously it happened on Thursday. We're recording this Monday. This will be out Tuesday. Chara wants to stay. Says, don't know why that question was asked to me 5 minutes after. I didn't really feel like answering it then, even though Doc Emmerich pretty much eulogized him after the game. I think that was kind of what set the stage. Like, I think we were all kind of like, maybe it's his last game. And then Emmerich just kind of goes on this diatribe of like, well, if you give me 1 minute, and just, goes off about Chara. But he's probably going to stay. I know we both think this. Keep him. Sign him. Yeah. What's the downside? What's the downside to this? And what's the other options? You have no other options.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest key is just being realistic of one, what his expectations for his role would be next year if you bring him back, and two, just what are your options? And that's because, like, let's say Torey Krug walks and, Chara wants to come back on a 1-year, $1.5 million, dollar contract, and you say no for some reason. Like, all right, well, who do you rolling out there then? Like, all right, you bump up Grizzly next to McAvoy, which, I think is an intriguing pairing, but then who else do you rolling out there? Like, it's, is John Moore going to be your second pairing guy? Is he the guy you want to be playing 20 plus minutes a night? Is it everyone I think always is quick to point to Vakanainen, but again, like maybe he comes back and has a strong training camp, but it seems like his kind of development is either kind of stalled or, it's taken a little bit of a step back over the last, year or so. Jacob Zaboral is a guy who I think obviously gets kind of ripped on just in terms of, his draft status, but it seems like he's a guy who maybe has turned a corner. Like Jay Leach mentioned back in May when we talked to him that he thought he was the best defenseman down the stretch. And I think Zaboral even was like maybe the last defenseman cut during training camp. Like I feel like he outplayed Vakanainen during that stretch. So, but again, even if maybe he's ready to make that breakthrough, if next year's the year you want to go for it, do you want to roll out like a guy like Zaboral who, is a late bloomer and you don't really know what you get from him yet? And again, like you're going to hear this whole offseason about how the Bruins, there's all different, ways of thinking, but you're going to hear like they got to get tougher. They got to get someone who's, bigger or something like that. All right, well, rolling out Vakanainen and Zaboral who are like, what, maybe 6 feet, 6'11", 6'1", like.
Zaboral's actually 6'2". I thought he was way
6'2",
shorter.
wow.
He's 6'2".
But he's also, I think, when you watch him play, he's not like a guy known for being like a physical kind of guy, right? Like
no.
So, are those going to be your options there? It's like, all right, well, you could make things somewhat easier for yourself because you're already going to be busy dealing with hopefully adding a guy to the top 6 or, a guy on the third line. You're going to have to find a replacement for Krug, a guy like that who's logs those kind of minutes. Like, why don't you make things easier for yourself and bring back Chara on a 1-year deal with like little risk as a third pairing guy? Like, you put him in a minimized role, he's probably going to really help you out there, especially the fact that he's not going to cost you that much against the cap.
Yeah, Connor, you know what they're going to do? They're going to put Zach Senyshyn on Krejci's right side, so he plays with Jake DeBrusk, and they're going to put Jacob Zaboral on the second pairing. And then 2015, Don Sweeney's going to be proven right again. 2015 draft was actually a huge success.
I think they're going to bring back Jacob Francesca Carlson, and I think he could be an intriguing guy if you switch him on the blue line.
They might even bring back Zach Hamill and see what they got in him for the fourth line.
I can't even make a Zach Hamill joke. That one was so bad.
Yeah, the Zach Hamill one, that was so long ago. At least that wasn't Sweeney. But we've beat this like a dead horse. We have beat this into submission. But I will say this offseason, if there's ever been an offseason that proves why the 2015 draft was a spectacular miss, it is this one. Because you have Jake DeBrusk, who has been extremely inconsistent, but out of the 3 has been by far the best.
Oh, yeah.
Like, DeBrusk has been fine. I mean, he's just inconsistent. But that pales in comparison to your 2 other problems from those 3 first-round picks. If you hit on one of those others, you might have a top 6 right winger. If you hit on one of those others, you might have a top 4 or top 2 defenseman. Like, it is incredible to me that was sort of the moment to do that. And then what draft was Vakanainen?
2017?
Or 17?
2017.
Yeah, 16 was McAvoy.
Yeah.
So 17 was Vakanainen. So you have that. So you have 5 first-round picks in 3 years, and you hit on 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
That is horrendous. Yeah. And that's the thing. And so you're seeing what happens. I remember I had a scout once tell me that when a team does bad drafting, teams that are bad, you can go back 5 years and look at their drafts and see if they were good or bad. And typically they're bad.
Yep.
And you're starting to see that with the Bruins. They're holding on to it's like a team that peaked in high school.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're holding on to those memories, those older guys. Come on, one more run. We're just one more run. And it would be so much easier if those draft picks were hit on. Now, I know we talk about this all the time, and we will never stop talking about this. We will always talk about this, but it's a real thing. It's a legit thing, and you're seeing it now. If there's ever been a moment when you're seeing it. Now, Sweeney's done a lot of good things. Coyle, a lot of those fourth line signings have been great. Halak, he's been great with a lot of things, but that draft, and again, it was his first one, so it's tough to he kind of gets thrown in there. And, they trade Lucic to trade Dougie Hamilton. But it's still, I look at that draft and I think, man, what could have been? So we briefly mentioned it, but I think this is huge for Grzelcyk and McAvoy in their own rights. You have Grzelcyk, who potentially could be seeing top power play minutes. You have McAvoy, who could also see some top power play minutes. You have McAvoy potentially playing without Chara and playing with Grzelcyk on the top pairing, which would open. I mean, we see when they're out there. I mean, they're basically Fluto Shizawa wrote this. They're racing each other up the ice, which is great to see. You don't see that with McAvoy when he's with Chara. You saw them at BU together. Mm-hmm. Granted, that was 100 years ago now.
Thanks.
You're old.
I really appreciate it.
But what's in store with them? What's going to happen?
I mean, I think you look at we've viewed McAvoy for years now as kind of that next guy up, the guy who's going to be your franchise defenseman. And I think next year is going to be his biggest opportunity to kind of show that. Because you've obviously seen it in flashes. And I think a guy like McAvoy, feels like, especially in his first few years, you would see, a game where he's obviously still kind of, rounding out his overall game, but you'd see a game every once in a while where he just takes over. Where you're like, oh man, like this is the guy you could get, in a couple of years from now, that'd be like his, his regular kind of game. And I think, you see when he's really locked in, like I point to that game 5 against Tampa. I mean, he gets knocked out of the game, comes back, and like that overtime, I mean, he was everywhere. Like he was, pushing up the ice, like he was still being responsible, in Boston's own zone. Like he was just doing a little bit of everything. And I think that shows you when he's given another, defensive partner like Grzelcyk, who is also, quick on his skates, can move the puck. They're both really good in transition, but Grzelcyk especially as kind of that first pass guy out to start the breakout. Like, those guys can be really dynamic together. And I think especially where they might be given a little bit more leeway to work in the offensive zone, I think that's going to be key because, as Cassidy kind of mentioned when he talked to us on Wednesday, they need more 5-on-5 offense. And a lot of that, it's not just the forwards. Like they also need defensemen to get more involved, or at the very least, just, increase their shot volumes. Like how many of those goals from Tampa during this past series were deflections or, tips or rebounds from, shots from the high slot or the point? Like the Bruins need more of that. And I think, you get McAvoy to shoot more, which has kind of been the one issue with him over the last couple of years. Grzelcyk, as much as every time I think Grzelcyk scores a goal, he always mentions post game that like his shot's not good, but like his shot has gotten a lot better since, like, especially once he first arrived. So I think, those guys, you put them together at 5-on-5. I think on the power play, if Krug gone, I would imagine that Grzelcyk gets the first crack at that top power play unit. So, and again, McAvoy, you give him more minutes, maybe who knows what Cassidy does? Like maybe he decides to be more conservative and balance it out and puts, 2 defensemen on the top power play unit and try that, or they could also just overload again. And, it's the power play we saw during the postseason where you add Krejci up there and kind of go all in. Like there's an opportunity for both those guys to, one, get more minutes, get more, offensive zone time, especially in 5-on-5. And if, you're on the power play, like if Grzelcyk's power play won, quarterback, that guy could add another 10, 15 points to his point total, the way that power play operates, just from secondary assists, just feeding the puck back in and letting those guys go to work. So I think it's going to be a big opportunity for both those guys. And again, it's a different look. And as much as, people say the Bruins need to get bigger, I think if you add, as I think you mentioned a few guys, but like a Brendan Dillon or Joel Edmondson or one of those guys, as kind of a bigger option down there, and you roll with that top pairing, they may not be the biggest, but they could be probably one of the more dynamic top pairings in the league. It gives you a different wrinkle to your team, how you go about 5-on-5 offense. And again, these are the guys you want to invest in going forward. You have to build that next kind of wave of talent. And I think you roll with guys like McAvoy and Grzelcyk. You can I think the potential is there for them to be a modern day top pairing group, especially in kind of today's NHL.
Yeah, and I also think McAvoy should get a shot at power play 1. I've always liked him on the power play. Also, I think Cassie's going to switch. I think that's going to be a work in progress all year, to sort of find what works with those 2 guys and what works with the power play. So I think it's big for both of them. I think you're going to see jumps in points for both of them. Certainly, I think you're going to see because McAvoy was their best defenseman in the postseason. I don't think that's even really disputed. I don't think there's anybody else who really came close. Grzelcyk at times. So my last topic I want to get to, and I actually mentioned it with the 2015 draft. When will Jake DeBrusk figure it out? When will Jake DeBrusk, because he said, he mentioned the other day, there were a lot of ups and downs. I think he said he was 1 goal off 20 goals. So he did have that. But I look at DeBrusk's game, and I just feel there's more. I feel there's more, especially working with a guy like Krejci. There's more to it. And I just don't think it's there yet. And I feel like every year we say this. Now, granted, he's only been here for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like this guy has been here for 6 and we're going, when is this guy going to cash in? He's been here for 3, but he's entering a time in which the Bruins are really going to start to rely on him even more. I don't think there's a lot of room for him anymore to get demoted to the third line, or, to get benched or to get healthy scratched. He's got to figure it out at some point. And I think this upcoming year is really his test, and sort of his, and especially with the contract coming up, if the past 3 years, let's say he's, 30 goal scorer, you hand him a long-term deal, or at least 6 years, in the 30 million range, he gets $5 million a year. I don't think he gets above 3.5. Now, I know Hags was suggesting he was going to get 6. I was like, what?
Yeah, he's not getting that.
No, that's not happening.
Again, that was one too where his agent said that, and listen, that's his agent's job. His agent's the one who's pumping his tires. So, but he's not getting 6.
But so that's why when I see DeBrusk, it's like, I think his upcoming contract, what they give him as an RFA, is really going to be a prove me deal. I think they're going to give him 2 to 3 years, 3.5, and say, look, you got to go out there and prove that you're worth 5, 6, top 6 money. When does he figure it out?
Well, I think for the Bruins, you're hoping it's next year. And again, it's not even the biggest thing is obviously just the offensive generation of how kind of inconsistent it is, because he'll go on a stretch where he, has, 1 primary assist and no goals for 9 games. And all of a sudden he buries 5 goals in 3 games. Right. So that's kind of the biggest issue, because when he's capitalizing on those chances, you see how potent that second line can become, right? Just having a guy like that. But I also think just for him, it's just the overall kind of performance of, in terms of that inconsistency. Because, I kind of look at a guy like Andre Kasha obviously ran out of gas, kind of, especially in that game 5. I think he probably played his worst game in that game 5. He was on the friggin' 4th line to end that game. But I think you saw, especially, in that Carolina series and maybe in game 1 against Tampa, even if he wasn't burying his chances, that guy was buzzing around the net, right? He was still winning puck battles. He was generating grade A shots, putting himself in a spot for a guy like Krejci to find him and get a good shot off. And it seems like when, DeBrusk is in kind of one of those funks that he has, it's sometimes you kind of don't even notice him in the game, right? It's not like he's, a lack of effort. He's not doing anything out there. It just seems like he's not impacting the game in some positive way. I think for the Bruins, you just need something like that. Again, look at that third line of, Coyle, Bjork, and Sednik in game 5. They didn't score, but you notice them, right? They were extended ozone time. They were recovering pucks, doing all those kind of things. So I think, I think you just need more of that from DeBrusk at the very least, because if you just bring that kind of game consistently, you extend ozone time, you're paired with a guy like Krejci, and next year, maybe it's Kasha again and he starts burying those chances, or they go get another legitimate top 6 guy. He's got the pieces around him that he should be a guy who consistently scores 25. He only scored 30. He would have scored 30 last year if he just had a little bit of a longer, hot streak, or he started a little bit stronger. So I think you just need that kind of consistent performance from him, where he's at least, winning puck battles and extending ozone time and those kind of things, because you need a guy who you can at least know what you're going to get most nights, right? Because you just can't have, some of these stretches there of 5+ games where he's kind of a non-factor, especially now where, these other veterans are getting older. You need a guy with fresh legs like DeBrusk to start, being a more consistent presence, especially in a top 6 role where the Bruins need some consistent guys next to Krejci.
That's it. It's consistency. You just need that consistency, and not the streakiness. And Cassie always mentions it. He's a streaky guy. Maybe he's getting hot now. And it's always kind of playing the maybe game with him. And I feel like this upcoming season, as you said, is sort of going to be his big test, and sort of really figure out where he is, at least in his development, and what his future is with the Bruins, because they're not going to give him a ton of money if he's not going to produce well, especially next to a guy like Krejci. You're playing with David Krejci, and you hope that this isn't, that DeBrusk, we haven't seen the best of DeBrusk just because he's playing next to Krejci. But I think there's a lot more to give. And I think we'll probably see that this coming year. Connor, thank you for joining as always. Is there anything you'd like to plug before I let you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you said, we should have some interesting Zoom calls this week with, Don Sweeney, hopefully, and Neely, and a lot of, I think,
Jacobs.
interviews that will get, yeah, we'll see. But a lot of interviews, I think, that should shed some light on, maybe setting expectations or the general outlook of how they're kind of viewing what should be a pretty key offseason for this group in terms of determining whether, how many more cracks at the cup they have and, how they kind of plan for the future. Because they need to make some big moves, I think, this offseason just to retool on the fly. So, we'll have a whole bunch of breakdowns on what to expect this offseason. I think every single day we're going to have a different news story out, just breaking down maybe a player or a different, trade target, free agency, all those kind of things. So follow along at Boston Sports Journal, subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at ConnorRyan_93.
Do that. Go there. Do all those things. Connor, as always, thank you so much for joining. And for CLNS Media, I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.